She's been missing for 61 days. 61 long days. And yet, despite every resource thrown at the case, no one has been able to name the person connected to the DNA left at her home. The FBI, the Pima County Sheriff's Department, the forensic labs in Florida, they've all been working tirelessly, running every test, cross-checking every database. But the trail remains cold. They didn't fail for lack of trying. The DNA was submitted to CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system. 19 million offender profiles, over 1 million forensic profiles, a system that has solved more than 750,000 cases nationwide. And the result? Nothing. No match. No hit. No name. Then came the second sample, recovered from inside the house, a completely different unknown DNA. Same result. Nothing. Today, we revisit this DNA, not just as evidence, but as the key to a question that has hovered at the edge of this investigation since late March. Could the breakthrough that everyone is waiting for finally be hidden in the traces left behind those 61 days ago? The answer might rewrite everything we think we know about this case. Here's the shocking question that stopped me in my tracks. Did investigators collect Nancy Guthrie's flower pots as evidence? On the surface, it sounds trivial, but stay with me, because in a case with 61 days of no arrest, no suspect named, no CODIS match, and 0 confirmed DNA hits, the question of who touched what in the dark, behind her home on the early morning of February 1st, might be one of the most critical forensic questions nobody dared to ask, until day 58. The answer came from a 30-year SWAT commander on national television, in 3 words that should make anyone watching feel a surge of frustration and disbelief. But before we get to that explosive reveal, we need context, because in this case, the story behind the evidence is just as important as the evidence itself. Let's go back to the beginning of the DNA trail. Multiple samples, multiple pieces of evidence, all separate, but in public conversation, they've often been conflated. Understanding which DNA came from where, and under what circumstances, is key to finally piecing together who was at Nancy Guthrie's home, and what they left behind in the shadows that night. This isn't just science, it's the story of a crime, waiting for its first breakthrough. Here's where the story takes a chilling turn. When investigators arrived at Nancy Guthrie's Catalina Foothills home on the morning of February 1st, they were met with a scene that was both shocking and strangely meticulous. Blood marked the front doorstep, a Ring camera had been ripped from its frame, back doors were left propped open, and yet, according to sources close to the investigation, the house itself remained immaculate, almost untouched. Inside most of the rooms, there were no obvious signs of struggle, but forensic teams had already discovered something far more significant. On February 13th, the Pima County Sheriff's Department confirmed what investigators had quietly known. DNA had been collected from the property that did not belong to Nancy Guthrie, or to anyone known to be in close contact with her. Multiple sources verified this. The FBI was briefed, labs were engaged, and yet the statement that DNA was collected from the property raises as many questions as it answers. We still don't know where exactly on the property the DNA was found, how many separate samples exist, whether there's a single unknown profile or multiple, or if the evidence is even complete enough to work with. Every word was carefully chosen by the sheriff and the FBI, because in a case like this, every detail matters, and every unknown could be the thread that unravels the entire mystery. It's not just a crime scene, it's a puzzle, and the DNA could be the key to revealing who crossed that threshold before anyone knew what was about to happen. Here's where the case twists into something even more confounding. About 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home, a lone glove was discovered abandoned by the side of the road. The FBI collected it immediately, and preliminary testing suggested it matched the type worn by the masked figure captured on the Ring camera at the front of her house in the early hours of February 1st. That figure, a male, roughly 5 feet 9 inches to 5 feet 10 inches, average build, carrying a 25-liter Ozark Trail backpack, had become the face of suspicion overnight. The glove was sent to a lab in Florida. The result? A clean DNA profile, male, unknown, submitted to CODIS, no hit. Sheriff Chris Nanos confirmed this publicly, and the FBI verified it to the press. But here's the detail that deserves attention. This glove DNA did not match the unknown DNA recovered inside the house. Two separate unknowns. Two separate questions. The person who left a trace inside Nancy's home and the one whose DNA clung to that glove may not be the same individual. This revelation opens the possibility of multiple unknown contributors, meaning even if one piece of evidence is eventually identified, investigators could still be chasing another. And just when it seems the puzzle can't get more complex, another quietly reported complication emerges, threatening to widen the net of uncertainty even further. The case isn't just unsolved, it's layered, and every new detail deepens the mystery. Here's where the forensic story gets truly frustrating and chilling. Sources close to the investigation told CBS News that the DNA recovered inside Nancy Guthrie's home might not produce a usable profile at all. One described it as low-level, almost whispering through the evidence. Another insider cautioned that while even a low-level sample can sometimes be enhanced with advanced scientific methods, that process isn't quick. It could take weeks, maybe months, before anything actionable emerges. Sheriff Chris Nanos laid out the reality. First, the lab must untangle merged DNA samples from inside the residence. Then, after further testing, they can determine if any material is viable for investigative genetic genealogy or submission to CODIS. This isn't a promise. He was careful to set expectations. The clock isn't ticking toward answers, it's stretching indefinitely. Fox News Digital revealed an extra complication. The DNA isn't just scarce, it's mixed. Multiple profiles intertwined in a single sample. Before investigators can compare anything to a database, the lab must painstakingly separate each strand, a process that can take weeks or months depending on complexity. Sheriff Nanos emphasized the gravity of this. A mixed sample could require up to a year to fully unravel. 1 year. Nancy has been missing 61 days, yet the evidence that could identify her unknown intruder may sit in a lab for months, with no guarantee it will ever yield a usable profile. The clock is moving, but the answers remain suspended in uncertainty. Here's where the investigative puzzle sharpens, and why every strand of DNA matters more than ever. C.E.C. Moore, the chief genetic genealogist at Parabon Nanolabs, and one of the country's top experts in investigative genetic genealogy, the same technique that identified the Golden State Killer and cracked the Brian Koberger case in Idaho, spoke directly about the Nancy Guthrie investigation on NewsNation. Her takeaway was blunt. Genetic genealogy only works if investigators have a viable DNA sample from the suspect. In this case, that's a big if. And that if could determine everything. Let me break it down. Traditional CODIS searches rely on short tandem repeat (STR) testing, comparing 20 genetic markers against the federal database for a direct match. If the suspect isn't already in the system, arrested, convicted, or submitted in a state that requires it, the search hits a dead end. No match, no progress. Investigative genetic genealogy, however, works differently. It uses single nucleotide polymorphism sequencing, or SNP testing, which examines hundreds of thousands of markers. The goal isn't a direct match, it's relatives, distant cousins, shared ancestry. Law enforcement accesses databases like GEDmatch, Family Tree DNA, and DNA Justice, together under 2 million profiles. The massive commercial giants, Ancestry, 23andMe, MyHeritage, hold tens of millions of profiles, but they block law enforcement access. In other words, even with the best science in the world, without a usable DNA sample, this investigation is running uphill. That big if looms over every lead, every analysis, every potential breakthrough. The question now isn't just who left the DNA. It's whether science can trace it back to a human being at all. Here's the crux of the investigation right now, and why every inch of Nancy Guthrie's backyard could hold the key. C.E.C. Moore made it clear, even trying to get law enforcement access to the massive commercial DNA databases, Ancestry, 23andMe, MyHeritage, would almost certainly spark a legal battle. That leaves investigative genetic genealogy, IG, as the path forward. The FBI has confirmed it's underway, but there's a catch. It only works if the DNA sample is viable enough to generate a clean SNP profile. And the sample recovered inside Nancy's home? It may not be. So, 61 days in, the DNA trail hasn't gone cold, but it also hasn't led anywhere definitive. The tools that could solve this case are waiting, but they need that sample to hold up under analysis. That's why the events on the back patio that night matter more than anyone may have realized. Because what if there's another sample? One never collected, never analyzed, sitting in plain sight on that same back patio, just waiting to be discovered? That potential evidence could completely shift the investigation. Understanding what investigative genetic genealogy can do, and just how far it can reach, is essential because this case is now pointing directly at that question. Running DNA through Cody's and coming up empty doesn't mean the sample is useless. It simply means it hasn't found a direct match in the federal database of people who have been arrested, convicted, and required to submit DNA. It's not a dead end, it's a challenge. And every unanswered question about uncollected or untested DNA is a potential breakthrough waiting to happen. The stakes have never been higher. The unknown DNA could be the single thread that unravels the mystery. Here's where the tension of this case sharpens. A no-hit in Cody's doesn't mean the suspect is invisible. It simply means they haven't left a genetic footprint in the criminal justice system before. That's why investigative genetic genealogy exists. But IGG isn't magic. It demands a clean, viable DNA sample with enough readable markers to build a workable SNP profile. Without that, the process stalls, waiting for either more relatives to upload their data or for advances in technology to rescue a partial sample. In a case where an 84-year-old woman has been missing for 61 days, waiting isn't acceptable. Every hour, the Arizona sun and environmental exposure degrade the evidence. If the house DNA is too low-level or too mixed, investigators need another source. The glove DNA, already submitted to Cody's and yielding no match, is a separate unknown. If neither can produce a usable SNP profile, the next window of opportunity lies with any DNA left behind on flower pots, the screen door handle, or the back gate, surfaces that sources close to Banfield have said were touched that night. If that evidence wasn't collected, 61 critical days have already slipped away. That's the weight behind Bob Krieger's 3 words and why the reporting from Ashley Banfield on day 58 still matters. It highlights a potential gap that could make or break the entire investigation. The case is now at a point where every missed piece could define the difference between solving it and letting it remain a mystery. The clock is running, and every untested surface may hold the answers investigators are racing to uncover. Here's where the story gets chilling. March 31st, 2026. Let's be clear, what we're about to discuss comes from multiple law enforcement sources cited by Ashley Banfield. It hasn't been officially confirmed on the record by the Pima County Sheriff's Department or the FBI, but it is attributed reporting from a credentialed journalist with multiple corroborating sources. That distinction matters, because we're walking a line between verified fact and high-level reporting, not speculation. According to those sources, when investigators first arrived at Nancy Guthrie's home, the back doors weren't just ajar, they were deliberately held open. 2 doors, an outer screen door and an inner solid kitchen door. And here's the detail that makes forensic experts sit up. Both doors were propped wide open using Nancy's own flower pots. Not a random rock, not a chair, not something grabbed from the yard in haste. Her decorative pots, objects that a person would have to lift, position, and handle with intention. The implications are stark. These weren't casual movements. They were deliberate, calculated actions. Each pot is a potential surface for fingerprints or DNA. Each touch point could tell the story of someone who not only knew what they were doing but had also visualized this scene in advance. That's not burglary in panic. That's a careful, methodical intrusion. And it's exactly why investigators are obsessively revisiting every surface, every object, looking for traces left behind on those seemingly innocent flower pots. This isn't just a detail. It's a window into the suspect's mindset, and every tiny mark on those pots could hold the clue that cracks the case wide open. Here's where the investigation takes a darker, almost cinematic turn. According to Ashley Banfield's high-level sources, the intruder didn't just prop open a single door. He methodically opened the screen door and used Nancy Guthrie's flower pots to keep it wide. Then he did the same with the back gate, creating an unbroken corridor from the street, through the yard, and straight into the kitchen. Every detail points to planning, not impulse. This wasn't an opportunist. It was a calculated operator with a precise sequence in mind, someone who had already mapped the back of the property and knew how to keep each door from shutting behind him. In that moment, the flower pots weren't decoration. They were tools, part of a premeditated strategy. But it doesn't stop there. Banfield sources revealed that multiple security cameras and exterior lights had been smashed. Spotlights dangling, cameras destroyed, the property stripped of its electronic eyes. This was someone who knew exactly where the surveillance was, someone who had spent time close enough to the home to study it, understand its blind spots, and neutralize them before the abduction. In other words, this person did reconnaissance. They stalked Nancy and her house, learned which doors were unlocked, identified which spotlights needed to be removed, and mapped the property before that fateful night. This isn't random criminal behavior. This is methodical preparation. An intruder who planned the pathway, neutralized the eyes, and weaponized the household objects in his path. Every act, every detail, whispers a terrifying truth. Someone had rehearsed this, knew the terrain, and was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Here's the chilling pivot in the story. According to Banfield sources, this wasn't a reckless intruder, it was someone who understood evidence. He came to the back of Nancy Guthrie's house fully aware that cameras could capture him, and he eliminated those risks. Lights smashed, cameras disabled, he had prepared. But there's a blind spot that no amount of electronic sabotage can cover: physical surfaces. DNA doesn't care if a camera is rolling. Every touch, every graze of skin, every lift of a flower pot with ungloved hands leaves a trace. And if that happened on January 31st into February 1st, that DNA is still there, waiting to be found. Contrast that with the front of the house. The Ring camera captured him in gloves, mask in place, backpack on, hands covered. He knew he was being recorded and prepared accordingly. Now, the question lingers. At the back, where the cameras were gone and the lights disabled, was he as careful? Or did the absence of surveillance lead to a critical slip, an ungloved touch, a trail left behind that could ultimately crack this case wide open? That small detail, the difference between masked precision and unobserved contact, may be the key to connecting the dots in this chilling investigation. Here's where the tension sharpens. At the front of Nancy Guthrie's house, he was methodical, gloves on, masked, calculated. But at the back, he was handling real, physical objects. Flower pots propped against doors, a gate shifted to create a clear path. He was moving fast, in the dark, in a space he believed unmonitored. Did he keep his gloves on? Or did the rush, the darkness, or the awkwardness of lifting heavy objects lead to a slip, a single, ungloved touch? We don't know. There is no official confirmation about what he wore while manipulating those pots. But the question is crucial. If those flower pots were handled barehanded and never collected, they could hold the DNA of the person who abducted Nancy Guthrie. 61 days later, exposed to the harsh Arizona sun, that evidence is degrading, but it's still a forensic reality, not speculation. And it doesn't stop there. The flower pots are just one piece of a broader plan that shifted between the back patio and the front door. Movement, improvisation, and the presence of blood all suggest that the intruder was adapting in real time, turning a rehearsed plan into an execution. But even the most meticulous planning can leave behind a single trace that breaks the case wide open. This is where the story of that night moves from calculated precision into a living forensic puzzle. Here's where the night takes a critical turn. According to sources close to the investigation, when law enforcement arrived, Nancy Guthrie's house was immaculate. Most rooms untouched, no signs of struggle, nothing to suggest violence inside. On the surface, everything appeared normal. Her sister and brother-in-law arrived the next morning and, seeing the calm interior, initially wondered if a medical emergency had occurred. Nothing inside screamed crime. Then the details emerged: blood on the front doorstep, the Ring camera ripped from the wall, the back doors propped open with flower pots. That sequence, pristine interior, pre-propped entry, blood outside, destroyed surveillance, reveals a methodical path. The intruder likely entered through the back kitchen doors, quietly navigated the house, found Nancy, and prepared to move her toward an exit. Banfield's source speculation suggests the original plan was to exit through the backyard, past the propped gate, avoiding the street and any remaining cameras. But there's a complication that changes everything. Nancy Guthrie wasn't just elderly. She was 84 with severe mobility issues and a back condition. Savannah Guthrie explained that even on a good day, her mother's mobility was limited. She could barely make it to the mailbox. The intruder's plan, carefully mapped for stealth and concealment, suddenly collided with the reality of Nancy's physical limitations, forcing improvisation under high stakes in the dark. The immaculate house, the propped doors, and the blood outside now tell a story of a plan that had to adapt in real time. Here's the chilling pivot in the story. Banfield framed it sharply. Did the intruder fail to account for Nancy's limitations? Did he assume she could walk farther than her body allowed, mapping an exit that reality instantly shattered? Whatever struggle, whatever moment produced the blood on that front doorstep, it occurred at a place he had not originally planned to use. The front door, camera disabled, exit unplanned, became the site of improvisation. And improvisation under pressure is dangerous. A meticulously prepared plan meets human unpredictability, and suddenly every move carries risk. Every touch, every object handled, becomes a potential trail. Those flower pots at the back, once props in a controlled corridor, now loom as forensic gold. Gloves were worn at the front when cameras could see, but what about the back? Through the setup, the entry, moving Nancy, the shift to the front door, did the gloves stay on? No one can say. Enter Bob Krieger, a retired 30-year SWAT commander from the Pima County Sheriff's Department, 3 decades of law enforcement experience, widely cited as a credible outside expert. Even he, with years of tactical expertise, could not answer that simple but crucial question. And that uncertainty, gloves or bare hands, back or front, may hold the key to unlocking the DNA trail that could finally identify who took Nancy Guthrie. The precision of planning collided with the unpredictability of life, leaving forensic breadcrumbs that might still reveal everything. Here's the striking reality. Bob Krieger is no armchair analyst. 30 years in SWAT, hands-on experience in Pima County investigations, deep institutional knowledge of exactly how cases like Nancy Guthrie's are run. He knows the terrain, the brush, the evidence, the mechanics of moving through a property. He has walked the back route with Brian Enton, analyzed why carrying an elderly woman that way was almost impossible, and dissected how leads, electronic evidence, and reward incentives shape an investigation. When Banfield's reporting on day 58 highlighted the flower pots, the very objects the suspect allegedly used to prop open doors and gates, the question was simple, but explosive. Were they collected as evidence? In a case with the resources of this investigation, FBI teams, Pima County personnel, tens of thousands of leads worked, forensic labs contracted, over $1 million in reward money, there should be one answer. One automatic answer: yes. Yet when asked directly, Krieger had to consider the possibility that these pots, potential carriers of the suspect's DNA, might not have been collected. A 30-year SWAT commander, someone who has been in the rooms where evidence collection decisions are made, knows exactly what that means. And it is precisely that uncertainty, the gap between what should have been automatic and what may have been missed, that makes this detail not just fascinating, but potentially pivotal to solving the case. Here's where it gets chilling. In any serious investigation, every object a suspect could have touched, doors, gates, flower pots, gets bagged, tagged, and sent straight to a lab. That's not exceptional. That's protocol. Day 1. Not day 58. Not after public attention focuses on a detail. And yet, when Bob Krieger, a retired SWAT commander with over 30 years of experience, was asked if the flower pots had been collected, his answer wasn't a confident yes. It wasn't certainty. It wasn't assurance. It was 3 words: I hope they did. 3 words from someone who knows exactly how evidence is handled in Pima County, who has walked these rooms, who has overseen the collection of every conceivable piece of trace evidence, and he can only hope. Let me be clear, that doesn't confirm the pots were left behind. The public record doesn't tell us what was bagged that night. There's a version where the pots were already collected on February 1st, shipped to the Florida lab, and sitting in the evidence queue right now, perfectly preserved, waiting to yield DNA. That would be the ideal scenario, investigators acting ahead of the question. But the fact that Krieger's answer is hope, not knowledge, is a reminder of just how delicate and potentially pivotal this investigation remains. Here's the heart of it. Bob Krieger didn't say, yes, they collected everything. When asked if every potential piece of evidence at Nancy Guthrie's home, the flower pots, the gate, the back doors, was secured, he didn't offer certainty. He said, I hope they did. And coming from a retired SWAT commander with 30 years of experience, that is not a casual comment. That is a loaded admission. Think about what it takes for someone with that level of expertise, decades in the field, institutional knowledge of exactly how evidence is handled, to settle on hope as the best he can offer. He knows the standard. He knows what should have been done. And the fact that he cannot confirm it. That gap is not a minor procedural detail. In a case with no arrest, no named suspect, and DNA evidence that may already be compromised, that gap could define the investigation. Because DNA isn't abstract. DNA degrades. That is a hard, scientific fact. Biological traces left on surfaces outdoors, flower pots, gates, handles, are assaulted daily by heat, UV light, humidity changes, and microbes. They break down. They fade. And Tucson, Arizona, is brutally unforgiving. It's been 61 days since anyone could have touched those flower pots, since that material has been exposed to sun, wind, and the desert environment. If DNA existed there, every day makes it less recoverable. Every hour counts. And that hope Krieger expressed? It's a reminder that in forensics, hope is not evidence, and time is never the friend of unanswered questions. Here's the stark reality. The clock is ticking on what may be the most critical evidence in this case. In other investigations, like the Brian Koppberger case in Idaho, usable DNA was recovered months after the crime. But that was from a knife sheath kept indoors, protected from the elements. Outdoor surfaces, exposed to sun, heat, wind, and Arizona's unforgiving conditions, degrade biological material far faster. C.C. Moore, the leading genetic genealogist who helped crack the Golden State Killer case, has been blunt. Investigative genetic genealogy only works with a viable DNA sample. Without it, the database, no matter how massive, cannot produce answers. Millions of profiles on GED match or family tree DNA are meaningless if the DNA itself has deteriorated beyond use. Right now, this investigation has multiple unknowns. The glove DNA, unconnected to the DNA inside the house, and that house DNA itself, low-level, mixed, and still weeks or months away from yielding a complete profile. Labs in Florida are working, but progress is slow, and the sheriff acknowledges the timeline is long. In that context, the question everyone should be asking is not trivial. What if the flower pots, the gate, the surfaces the suspect handled at the back patio, were never collected? If viable DNA exists there, untouched, it could be the key, potentially central to solving this case. Remember, the Golden State Killer wasn't caught because his DNA was in Cody's. It was because investigators had that one critical sample, preserved well enough to generate a profile and connect to distant relatives. Could the same opportunity be slipping through the cracks here? Here's the thing. In cases like the Golden State Killer, the breakthrough didn't come from the obvious evidence. Investigators uploaded a crime scene DNA sample to GED match, traced distant relatives, built a family tree, narrowed it down to a neighborhood, and then a suspect. But the key moment came when they got a fresh, uncontaminated sample, a car door handle, tissue in the trash, something the suspect touched every day without thinking anyone was watching. That's the logic. That's how a case breaks. Now, picture Nancy Guthrie's back patio. Flower pots moved in the dark by someone who thought no camera was watching. They could carry DNA in the exact same way. The pots weren't on any initial checklist, but if a viable sample exists there, untouched, it could be the one thing that shifts this case forward. And yet, as of day 58, and now 61 days later, neither the Pima County Sheriff's Department nor the FBI has confirmed whether those pots were collected, bagged, or analyzed. The only voice we have is a 30-year SWAT commander saying, "I hope they did." Hope, not certainty. This is the intersection of procedure and human reality. 61 days gone. An 84-year-old woman, in pain, someone's mother, grandmother, and neighbor, missing. And somewhere on her back patio, a detail that seems minor, the flower pots, could hold the DNA that finally cracks the case. It's a reminder that sometimes the evidence that matters most is the evidence no one thought to ask about. Here's the picture, sharp and unsettling. Nancy Guthrie tended her flower pots with care, arranged them just so, and made the back corner of her Catalina foothills home a place of quiet beauty. She lived a full life, dinners with family, games, ordinary evenings. On January 31st, she was dropped off at home around 9:45 p.m., the last confirmed sighting of her alive. What unfolded in the hours between that moment and 1:47 a.m., when her Ring camera stopped recording, is the heart of the mystery. Someone came. Someone who had planned it. They found the back door unlocked, smashed cameras, propped doors open using Nancy's flower pots, moved through her home leaving no obvious signs of struggle. And then, somehow, they emerged at the front with her blood on the doorstep. Gloved, masked, captured on the one camera still running. 61 days later, we still don't know who that person is. Investigators have worked 40,000 to 50,000 tips. The combined reward pool tops $1.2 million. Labs in Florida are painstakingly analyzing partial, mixed, low-level DNA. Investigative genetic genealogy is in motion. The glove yielded no CODIS match. The interior DNA may not even produce a usable SNP profile. And those flower pots, potentially holding the forensic clue that could break the case, are in question. The only certainty. A retired 30-year SWAT commander can only say, "I hope they did collect them." That hope may be the thinnest thread between this investigation and the truth. Here's what you need to feel, not just know. If you've followed this case from the beginning, before we even hit double digits on episodes, you already understand the framework. You know the timeline, the suspect, the Walmart backpack, which evidence has moved the investigation forward and which has gone cold. You know about the genealogy work, the $1 million reward, and Savannah Guthrie holding on to hope that her mother might still be alive. But today, the weight isn't in a new lead or a breakthrough. It's in the quiet, almost invisible detail of the flower pots. On the surface, it's nothing dramatic. No arrest. No suspect named. No press conference. Just 3 words from a 30-year SWAT commander who should know the answer but doesn't. "I hope they did." That phrase carries a weight few headlines can capture. It's the kind of uncertainty that chills an investigation, not because someone failed spectacularly, but because a man with decades of experience, who knows every protocol, every step, every standard, can only offer hope. There is a version of this story where the pots were collected on day 1. DNA already analyzed, already compared, already sitting in a Florida lab. That would be the version we want to be true. But right now, the question hangs in the open. And somewhere, on those pots in a lab, or still baking in the Tucson sun, the person who took Nancy Guthrie may have left a single trace, a single surface touched in a moment of overconfidence, a mistake made 61 days ago that could be the key to solving everything. Here's the stark reality. If no one collected those flower pots, if they still sit on that back patio untouched and unanalyzed, one of the best chances to identify who took an 84-year-old woman from her home in the dead of night may already be slipping through the cracks. This is not speculation. This is the forensic window investigators are racing against right now. If you know anything at all about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, no matter how small, even if you're unsure it matters, speak up. Call the FBI tip line at 1-800-CALL-FBI or submit online at tips.fbi.gov. The Pima County Sheriff's Department also has a tip portal. Links are in the description. Every piece of information counts. The Guthrie family has offered a $1 million reward. The FBI added $100,000 more, bringing the total pool to roughly $1.2 million. Someone out there saw something. Someone knows something. After 61 days, every lead, Every tip, every overlooked thread could make a difference. If you followed this channel from the start, you know we aren't stopping. We will be here for updates, for dead ends, for breakthroughs. Nancy Guthrie is not just a news story. She is a mother, a grandmother, a human being whose family is still waiting. The investigation is still active. And the question of those flower pots? It is far from closed. Stay with us.